So today I'm going to be doing a completely procedural animal cell part 1. And this part's going to include only the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, the nucleus, and a nucleolus. So let's start off by adding in an icosphere and naming our initial geometry node as cell membrane. And I want to try to keep this as clean as possible because hopefully in the very end this will all be included in just one project, like including the microtubules, including the mitochondria, including the endoplasmic reticulum, so on and so forth. So it's very important to keep this neat and tidy. So as we insert and name our first initial inputs, we're going to name them on the side so that when we want to change them later, it is a lot easier to go back and adjust settings as needed. So after we add on our icosphere, we're going to add in a mesh Boolean node, connect our icosphere to the first mesh and a cube to the second mesh. Increase the size of the x and y dimensions of the cube so that it cuts out a full section of the sphere. We're going to add in a transform node, and instead of just controlling it straight from the XYZ translation section, we're going to add in a combine XYZ node so that we can have minute control over just the Z position. You can add finer control into this by adding in a math divide node if you so wish, but I find that it's not too much of a terrible nuisance to just control the Z position as is, because I'm not working with tiny sizes. So rename this. I named it Bool Cube Z. Just name it whatever you want. And if you leave it like this is the effect you'll get. So after the mesh Boolean node, you're going to want to add in a set material node. Go over the shading editor, rename your material to whatever distinguishes it from other ones that you're going to create later. And just know that this isn't going to be the final material color or arrangement or anything. This is just to mark off what we're doing right now. Basically going to repeat the entire process that we've just created so that I can mark a distinction between the animal cell outside of the sphere, the membrane, and I'm going to create a bool object that's going to have a different material in the inside, which is going to be our cytoplasm. So what you're going to want to do is add in a mesh Boolean node at the very end. Ensure that it is a union node. And do note that this isn't going to be the final configuration. We do have to add in a couple of steps first beforehand. Add in a transform node. And we're going to do a very similar thing as before. Add in a combine XYZ node. Navigate over to the shading tab, make a new material so that we can distinguish this one from the other. And just incrementally raise the Z value until you see your essentially volume, your cytoplasm of the animal cell. Adjust the cytoplasm size as needed. Now we're not going to leave our configuration like this. We're also going to add in another bool object so that we can slice the volume of our cytoplasm as well when we cut it away. Add in a mesh Boolean node where the cube is going to be the second object and our icosphere is going to be the first object that represents the volume. And this is basically what we're going to recreate, what we're going to do. Except I don't want the volume to be raised up like this above the animal cell. So we're going to do that neat little trick that I talked about earlier where we add in a math node, change that over to divide, connect the output node over to the z value, and connect the initial value up to our group input. And we're just going to change that up until we get it to be just very minimally raised so that, you know, you can still see the material of the cytoplasm there. But it wouldn't necessarily be super noticeable unless you zoomed in a large amount to see that raised edge. So this, for our purposes, is good enough. Now, one thing that I do want to point out is that you get kind of like a weird effect when you decrease the resolution of your spheres. Now you'll notice that I frequently change the resolution of both the animal cell membrane and the volume, and that is because my computer is old and cannot handle too much computation at the moment. I really hope to upgrade. There you go. So we're going to add a little bit of texture by adding in a set position node and a noise texture to the offset. Now this is absolutely not what we're going to end up with because we're going to change a couple of things. Add in a vector math node, change that over to subtract, and subtract the output by 0.5, and that'll center our object right into the origin of the world here. Now, here's the part where I do have to admit my defeat. So my original thought was that I wanted to use a 4D noise texture and change the W over time so that this wasn't just a singular concrete structure, like it would change over time and look a lot more organic. But it did not turn out at all.
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
So yeah, don't do that. Also be sure to save your work, but if I can figure out how to make the cell membrane texture change over time, I'm sure I'll add an update eventually. But for now, I have to admit my defeat and just move on from here. So what I'm doing currently is increasing the resolution of our bool cube so that the top cutting part of our cross section is a bit higher resolution, and so that it doesn't look quite so blocky. Now, if I've mentioned before, I do want this to be an entirely procedural animal cell, so we need to keep this organized, and by doing that, I'm going to add in a frame, which is going to just basically visually group up all of the nodes that are associated with our animal cell membrane and cytoplasm. So just for a little bit of extra flair, change the color, and less for flair and more for usefulness, add a label as well. It is very important for us scientists and artists to label our work as we go and to make notes and ensure that we can go back on our work and realize what we've done and not have to muck around and find out again. So here I'm going to start animating this absolute monstrosity of a project. Going to increase that bool cube Z position up until I can see the entire animal cell. Decrease the subdivisions of the animal cell resolution so that my computer can get a nice little break. And begin to insert my keyframes here. Going to the very beginning of the animation. Right-clicking and inserting a keyframe right there into the attribute that I'm interested in. And then decreasing that bool position up until it's at the height where I want it to be, and adding a keyframe there as well. Now what I'm doing here is absolutely not mandatory, but it does help me to check up on my work and to see how well the movement of this animal cell looks. I'm creating an override material by adding in a plane and adding in a very basic material to that, like nothing that's going to be computationally intensive at all. Navigating over to the Edit tab and adding in a material override to be this new simple material. And the entire purposes of this is so that I can just see how this is going to look with the lighting that I've imposed, with the render engine, which is Cycles if I haven't mentioned that already, and just making sure that there are no weird artifacts or unexpected effects that are going to occur, because it would really suck for me to try to animate this entire animal cell with a weird effect going on. So this is what it ends up looking like. Looks fine to me. I can always increase that resolution of the bool cube, but you know, for the purposes of this, looks good. Now I'm going to decrease the resolution of the animal cell and the volume itself so that I can speed up the performance of my computer, and we're going to begin making the nucleus here. Now that we've created the very basis of the nucleus, we're going to proceed into creating the nucleus pores. So to do this, we're going to distribute a bunch of points on the faces of this initial shape that we have. Use the Poisson disc? Poisson? No, it's French. I don't really know how to pronounce it exactly. And adjust the minimum and maximum values so that there's about an even distribution of non-overlapping points. And we're going to instance an icosphere onto each of those points. So reduce down the radius, reduce down the subdivisions so that your computer won't completely slow down, and adjust both of those values as needed. Now don't get it twisted, we're not actually just going to leave the object as it is right here. This is just going to be our bool object for the nucleus pores. So just make whatever tweaks you need to in order to create the exact size that you want for your pores to be, and add in a mesh boolean so that the second object is all of those little spheres that we've just created, and the first object is the original icosphere that we instanced all of them onto. Now this is all cool and all, but I want to add in a little additional detail, and that would be making it so that you can actually see through all of those spheres, as if they're actually like sliced through like Swiss cheese or something. So we're going to add in another bool object, which is just going to be a transformed original icosphere that we have out at the very beginning. And from here, again, just make whatever changes you need to in order to make it appear in the way that you want it to. As you do this, insert a set material, go over to the shading tab, create a new material, and name it appropriately, and reassign that new material that you've just created back into the Geometry Nodes tab. And because I know this is going to be a very large project at the end of the day, I'm going to try to keep this organized, create a large frame, label it so that I can always come back and adjust any parameters that I want to in the future. So I'm also going to be animating this part of the cell by just rotating the nucleus over time. You know, it's not going to be completely accurate to how the real life animal cell nucleus moves within the cell over time, but it's just to rather give it a little bit of visual interest. Now I want to add that, you know, this is kind of low poly and I want it to look smooth, but if you use the set shade smooth node, you get kind of like a weird effect here, like it just doesn't look right. So what I'm going to use is, I believe, Bradley's set auto shade node for geometry nodes. I'll provide a link in the description, and this does an excellent job of detecting what parts of your model that are intentionally meant to be very crisp and which ones are intentionally meant to be smoothed over. And you can adjust the angle at which it decides what gets smoothed over with math and what is kept inherently sharp and crisp. Now here I am just setting up my Blender file so that I can render this whole scene and just make sure that it looks good without any weird glitchy effects with the animation and the nucleus that we just added. And it looks good. It looks fine. Now I am going to interject myself here and say that you can in fact add a nucleoplasm into your project here, but it does significantly slow down the rendering time. So I'm inserting some raw recorded footage of the different changes that I made in order to add in a volumetric material and to ensure that the union between the nucleoplasm and its volume can have a material assigned to it. So this is basically what I did. I will try to make a Gumroad account and like attach this entire file so that people can go in, but just replicate this as best you can. And on that note, we're going to move on to the next big part of this tutorial, which is creating the Nucleolus. So add in a highly subdivided icosphere and add in a new geometry nodes section. Create a delete geometry, and for that selection section, we're going to add in a noise texture and a color ramp. So when you do this, be sure that you plug in the color output of the noise texture into the factor of the color ramp and just adjust the scale, distortion, roughness, and any other factors that you want to change. Be sure that the delete geometry is changed over to the point deletion. And from there you can just futz around with the different values until you get a roughly kind of marbly and interesting texture to your icosphere. This is going to be the very base for the next big part of the tutorial. And if your icosphere is a little too rough, you can add in a subdivision surface and help smooth that out. And speaking of smooth, add in another modifier, which is the smooth modifier, and adjust the factor value until you get a nice smooth surface. And after you do that, add in a decimate modifier and select the planar mode and just adjust the angle at which the geometry will be deleted. From there, you can hide the icosphere that you've just created because you actually don't really need it. You just need the base geometry. You don't need the actual thing that you just created. So drag that icosphere into your big honkin' huge geometry nodes with the entire animal cell, and then plug that into the joint geometry, and there you get the OG, not really OG icosphere there. And from here we can make any adjustments that we want to within this main geometry nodes section. Now I'm removing the other parts of the animal cell because my computer is on the old side and she's not doing great. I think I need to upgrade her eventually. So I'm just trying to improve the performance by removing everything that is unnecessary and decreasing the subdivisions as I need to. So what I'm going to do here is connect the Nucleolus scale, labeling it as such, over to the group input and changing the type of value from a vector over to a float so that I can have finer and quicker control over the size of the Nucleolus. From there, we're going to add in a mesh to curve node so that we can make any curve adjustments that we need to, and also add in a profile to our curve, which will basically just make it look like spaghetti, and we can change the thickness of that as we want. Now we don't want our Nucleolus to just be boring and kind of resembling a very simple sphere with just a pattern of spaghetti on it. We want it to be a little more chaotic, a little more tightly and densely populated. So to do that, I'm going to add in a set position node, add in a noise texture, and a vector math node, subtracting everything by 0.5 so that we can center our model into the world origin once again. So just adjust the scale, distortion, roughness, everything there up until you get the look that you're going for. And unlike the animal cell membrane, I can actually change the W value here in a 4D noise texture and give it a lot more chaotic movement and not have it totally glitch out and freak out on me. So to achieve that, do what I was trying to do, add in a scene time, connect either the frames or the seconds over to the W value, and in order to have better control over the speed, you can add in a math node to divide or multiply that speed according to your needs. Now this is the part that we're going to make this have real 3D geometry and make it look like spaghetti. Add in a curve to mesh node, add in a curved circle node, and adjust that radius to be quite a bit lower because you don't want it to be 1 meter long. It'll look very strange. Now, do you note that this is not meant to be like a 100% one-to-one accurate depiction of what an animal cell looks like? It's just meant to get the idea across that the nucleolus is indeed a dense structure composed of RNA and proteins and is not a completely like concrete or static object. Like, it will move over time. I'm very certain, like 110 billion% certain, that the movement at which I assigned this structure is not accurate either. So do take this all with a grain of salt as you need to. This is just more for fun, educational purposes, and you can go into as much detail and as much accuracy as you wish to. But this is just a general fun tutorial that I wanted to put out there for all of y'all. So like every other part of our animal cell, add in a material, create a new material in the shading section of Blender and name it appropriately as such. Now here we're going to begin the process of animating the nucleus being cut away so that we can see the nucleolus within it. Be sure that when you add in your mesh boolean that you're putting it in the correct section of this whole setup, otherwise you will get some weird glitchy artifacts with the set auto shade smooth. And just like before, we're going to add in a cube, connect the size over to our group input, rename it appropriately so you can always go back and make any adjustments as need be. And just like before with the animal cell overall, we're going to add in that cube that we've just created into the second mesh so that we can cut away our nucleus. And just like before, we're going to change the x and y dimensions of our cube so that we can cut away the right parts of the nucleus. From there, add in a transform node, a combine XYZ node, connect that over to our transform section, and move everything around so that you keep your space a little nice and organized. And connect that Z value over to the group input, change the name as needed so that you can always go back and refer to things and change things as need be. It kind of sounds like a broken recorder just repeating the same things over and over again, because this part of the tutorial basically is just the same thing over and over again, creating bool objects, animating the values of which those objects are so that you can cut away different parts of your animal cell. And yeah, it's once you get it, the hang of it, you can just keep on going with it. It's pretty simple. It's just tedious and annoying. So just like before, go over to the frame that you want to begin this animation at. Make sure that your cube is not intersecting with your nucleus at all. And as soon as you want it to start cutting, that's when you can decrease the Z value. And once again, I'm going to render this entire animation just to make sure that there's nothing weird or strange going on. Looks good, looks fantastic. All right, let's move on to actually styling this entire thing, because for the most part, we've got our basic animation done, and now we can just worry about the aesthetics of this thing. Let's navigate on over to my favorite site for creating and looking up palettes. Coolers is very awesome in the sense that you can look up specific types of color blindness and check up on how good your color palette will look with the different types of color blindness in people. And this color palette that I chose looks pretty decent. I'm going to be sure to emphasize the different types of texture and contrast so that even if colors kind of look difficult to distinguish against each other, that at least there are some other visual cues for people to refer to see like what something is versus another. I'd also like to point out that I'm taking very heavy inspiration from this image that I saw on Google for an animal cell, just because like I don't know the artist at the top of my head. I'll put them on the screen somewhere, but they do a fantastic job of varying their material types between each of the individual components of the animal cell without going way too overboard in how much detail or not adding enough detail or distinction between each and every different element. So I'm trying to emulate their style, and yeah. I'm taking heavy inspiration from them, is what I'm trying to say. So one part about the materials that I would like to point out is that for the cytoplasm itself, I'm adding in a principled BSDF for the top surface of this material, decreasing the alpha value and decreasing the roughness and increasing the clear coat so that it gives like a kind of glassy look to it without it actually being glass. Like I want to be able to look through it. And we're going to add in a principled volume BSDF here and add that into the volume node of our material so that we can go in and make it so that the appearance of this material changes depending on the depth at which the light is entering through it. Does that make sense? Like, I want it to look like it's not just an empty shell with like a thing of glass on the top of it. I want it to look like there's a fluid that's occupying it. So here's that. Make adjustments to your material and colors as need be. And we're going to proceed with the next step. Another thing that I wanted to add is that you can use the color picker tool from within the shading section and select any hue or color that's on your screen, which makes it very helpful if you import your reference image from Coolars or whatever site that or image that you're referencing from. So you don't have to go in and manually pick out whatever hex value you're trying to recreate. Now, if you notice on the reference image on the right, there's a bit of a like dotted noise texture on the side. So in order to recreate that, I'm going to add in a noise texture and mapping and texture coordinate node and connect a color ramp with two of the colors from the Coolar palette that I've created and just adjust the scale, roughness, distortion of the color ramp and noise texture so that I can try to recreate that that pattern that's on the reference image off to the side. Now let's move on to the Nucleolus. Very simple material. I'm just going to pick out the nice deep red color and crank up the metallic value so that it differs from the volumetric material that we've created for the cytoplasm, and it differs from the nucleus and is visually a lot easier to pick out from each other. So render that initial image of whatever frame you want to look at all of the components in, and we're going to navigate over to the compositing tab so that we can make this look a little bit prettier after rendering the initial frame. And I got a new mic just as I was finishing this tutorial because the other one was really kicking me in the butt. So if you followed me for at any point in time, you'll know that my compositing method is very simple at this stage. I'm just going to add in a very basic alpha over and a lens distortion so that there's a little bit of a imperfect distorted edge at the end of our frame here. I'm going to reduce that rendering amount down to 100 so that my computer doesn't spend a literal day having to animate for that long, and this is what it ends up looking like. So you can make any additional changes or tweaks or modifications that you want to. That's what's so great about completely procedural modeling, is that you can always go back and very easily fix up whatever the heck you want to adjust in post. And that's it. That's the end of this first part of the tutorial. I am working on the other parts, so we'll have a complete animal cell model by the very end of this. So don't yell at me that I've completely forgotten about the microtubules or mitochondria or ribosomes or anything like that, because I haven't. It's in the works and it's coming eventually. So have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you eventually. Bye bye.